And I had always grown up hearing the story or the rumor that the reason why the Beatles broke up because of Yoko Ono.
Believe that every one of the Beatles' wives and girlfriends, especially at that time, like the amount of misogyny that was thrown their way was a huge part of the problem. They were easy targets. She was an easy person to blame.
And always just kind of being around and just kind of inserting herself and just being like, everybody is like, what the hell is she doing here? I knew a little bit of that going in this documentary. When I first saw her, I was like, oh my God, she's going to be a huge part of this documentary. I was surprised, and I'm interested in what you think and what you know about this. She's kind of a non-issue or a non-player. She's there all the time. Yes, they make a couple comments about John's attachment to her and her attachment to him and her being there. She gets in on a couple, I mean, I guess they had a, where she's kind of screwing around on the mic and having some fun or whatever.
Yeah.
But there really wasn't anything in this documentary I would come out of it and say that she was a major issue. Am I missing something or what? What's your take on that?
I wholeheartedly believe that every one of the Beatles' wives and girlfriends, especially at that time, like the amount of misogyny that was thrown their way was a huge part of the problem. They were easy targets. She was an easy person to blame because she broke up John's marriage and, all this stuff. But at the same time, she's an artist in her own right. She's a visual artist and a musician, just like John. And why wouldn't she be interested in what they're doing in the studio? She's like just working on her own stuff. She's not offering suggestions. She's not telling John how to play his parts. She's just hanging out. And Linda's there, and nobody ever talks about Linda being around taking photos and how that was, a distraction. They focus it all on her. Honestly, I really don't think she had much of anything to do with the Beatles breaking up. I think it was the fact that they had lived in such close quarters together for a decade. You need a break from each other. They were starting to splinter off in different directions and be their own people, and it wasn't her. She was just a convenient excuse for that.
I think you're right. And being new to all of this, and maybe there's more data that's out there or more content that maybe will change my mind. I don't know. I think you're right. It just seems like the issues that they had as a group with each other, there was all of that was kind of already in the works of pushing them apart and breaking them apart. She's obviously the easy target, and I think Paul made a comment or two. One, maybe when they were waiting for George to come back, he made some comment about, the headlines are going to be about Yoko sitting on the speaker or something and breaking up the band. And then and then he kind of laughed at that. And I think, maybe it was a little annoying for the rest of them. I'm not one of them, that she was around possibly too much or all the time. But for me, just watching the documentary, she seemed to be somewhat, even though she's like right there, like sitting almost attached to John, I don't think of her as being a distraction. And it didn't look like the others really minded. And like you said, they all had their spouses or girlfriends or whatever coming over. And George had his Hare Krishna fellows come over or something.
I think that would be far more distracting. And they even like made a little Hard Day's Night reference at the beginning of the film when they saw that guy, and they're like, "Oh, he's very clean, isn't he?"
That's one of George's friends.
Yeah, I think that bugs them way more than Yoko just sitting there. They might not have liked the screaming, but
I was curious what you thought about that, because that was another one to where my preconception of coming into this and watching this, and then when I first saw her, I was like, oh, and I'll admit, I kind of had a negative reaction when I first saw her on the documentary. I was like, it's going to be the Beatles and then Yoko. By the end of it, I was like, she's fine. Unless it was edited out or whatever. I was like, it didn't seem like she was an issue. And I think the respect that John and Paul, Ringo, and George kind of had for each other anyways. And I think they said, look, John needs her to be creative. So that's the way it's got to be. So I think Paul, at least, I think he talked about it the most in the documentary. he was fine with it. I think her being an issue is kind of blown out of proportion, but I'm only basing that off of this particular documentary. So
No, I think you're absolutely right on that. And it's been going on for decades. And honestly, I think this documentary coming out really kind of clears her name in that respect. And
yeah, I would agree with that.
I hope that people are willing to maybe re-examine their preconceived notions about that whole thing.
I think unfortunately on that, on the comment there of yours, I think for new people or people like myself or going forward the next 20 years, 50 years, I think that helps Yoko. I think the people just that don't like her, it doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything that you can give to those people sometimes, regardless of here's the video, it's right here.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the evidence of it or whatever, and they'll be like, I still hate her. She was still the reason or something. I don't think there's anything you can do about that, but I do think it helps her going forward in that.